in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Queen. I made this video a couple of days ago on the day I heard she died. Last night I saw on my news app that she wasn't doing well and that doctors were worried about her and the family were going to see her, and I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do if she dies. I don't even know this lady. And it's really difficult that she's gone. The local radio station here, they were saying recently, very casually, I think it was less than a week ago, they were talking about how when she dies, this, that and the other, but they were saying it as if they really didn't care and they were laughing about it. And I thought, wow, do they not care here about the Queen? Because I guess she barely visits Australia. So, I mean, it would make sense.
I'm just seeing the flags at half-mast, so yes, I'm going to cry, I'm sorry. It's just really shocking. I mean, she's 96, we knew that was going to come.
She had such an impact on the country that you can't deny what an amazing woman she was. What an inspiration, right?
She was the grandmother of the nation. She kept the whole of the Commonwealth with stability.
But actually, she's all over the news, really all over the world.
To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen. To us all, she would be with us forever.
Deutschland blickt voller Dankbarkeit auf die Queen, die neben vielen anderen auch dafür stand, dass sich die einstigen Kriegsgegner Großbritannien und Deutschland wieder aussöhnen konnten.
And I think that she had such a big impact because she kept her mouth shut a lot of the time. She didn't share her opinion on things. I was thinking about how that's the opposite of narcissism. How her whole life really was for other people. She said that when she was 21.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
Narcissists are interested in whether you're on their side or not, whether you're going to see things the same way as them. And if you're not going to, then they're going to see you as an enemy. They need to hear their own voices. They need that validation that they're right, like the emperor's new clothes. They need everybody to admire them and think that what they say is very wise and clever. The Queen was the opposite of that. She was sort of a tool, really, for the people she served, and she allowed for that. She said the words of the Prime Minister every year at Christmas, even though they weren't her words. She said them as if they were her words. And so instead of having her own agenda, she had to have the agenda of keeping the peace, of encouraging people to come together. She would meet all these different heads of state and she wouldn't say anything that was controversial.
She dined with the Russian President Boris Yeltsin in the Kremlin.
You and I have spent most of our lives believing that this evening could never happen. I hope that you are as delighted as I am to be proved wrong.
There was a reception at Windsor before a lunch, and the leaders were gathered and talking amongst themselves, and I knew Her Majesty was going to join the reception, but they didn't. The minute she walked into the room, the sense of love and respect was palpable, and they all turned and they all wanted to speak to her.
Every time there was a new Prime Minister, she would meet him or her. They'd have a coffee or a cup of tea and have a chat every single week. And so she had to get on with all these different people. She was basically a diplomat. Part of me was always curious as to what she thought. What side would she support in an election, for example? And it made me think about when it's not great to speak up and when it might be. There are lots of people who don't speak up because they're going to be bullied. They're going to be beaten down by an aggressive, domineering kind of person. Maybe that's their partner. Maybe it's someone at work. It could be a parent. Even when they're old, it could still be an elderly parent. So we can all be afraid of someone, and people who've been abused can often be afraid of a lot of people's opinions. They don't feel safe to express themselves. And in that sense, it can be really harmful to not be able to share your opinion, to feel like it doesn't matter, no one's interested, and there are going to be negative consequences. You're going to get punished if you do share it. That's a horrible way to live. So this video is not in celebration of that at all, but I guess it is in celebration of somebody who is able to swallow their ego to the point where they do the right thing by people. For the Queen, I'm sure she would have shared her views and her opinions with her family. She didn't do that with the world. She chose not to. Doing that would get in the way of what she was there to do. Her job was to get on with people in lots of different countries because that brought peace. It made people feel like there was a consistent, peaceful force coming from the UK, you know, and across the Commonwealth. And there aren't enough of those forces. We, you know, when you think about it, who can you rely on these days? The politicians tend to let us down. They don't stick to what they say they're going to do. There are lots of lies, you know, various things being uncovered many years later. All these people who worked with children, people who presented TV programs, later it turns out that they were doing cocaine, or they were molesting children. With the Me Too movement, all of the sexual abuse of different women going on behind closed doors that hasn't been talked about for decades. You know, so all these figures that we might have thought were reliable are turning out not to have been. And we can't rely on the people in our lives necessarily, because people aren't, in general, reliable. Being human is not a reliable way to be. You know, people can change their minds. People can change their minds about whether they like us, whether they have much in common with us, because we can change every year. No matter how old we are, we can change. We can get in touch with another part of ourselves and realise that actually we feel more distant than we thought from somebody. And obviously, if you don't know the Queen, you're not going to fall out with her anyway. You're not going to fall out with anyone that you don't get to meet. But you're also not going to one day discover that that person has a totally different view to you. If you open your mouth and give your viewpoint, sometimes you think people need to hear that, and that's going to make things better. And I think there can be, you know, I think there's an arrogance in that. And I'm talking about myself as well, and I'm saying that because I know that often, I mean, for example, if somebody's racist, I will have to say that you're being really racist, you know, or what are you talking about? And I think when it comes to something like that, you kind of do have to speak up. But there are grey areas where people have an opinion that they're entitled to have, and rather than accepting that opinion, I think you can think, oh, I need to say my piece because I'm right and they need to listen to me. They need to know that I'm right, and somehow something good is going to happen when they hear what I have to say. The Queen brought people together because she didn't do that. Because instead of talking about her own opinion all the time and talking about how wrong she thought some things were, she behaved, whatever she thought inside her head, she behaved like an accepting person, like somebody who accepted all sorts of people with all sorts of different beliefs. And that enabled them to feel peaceful, you know, to feel like they're free to be themselves and they're accepted and they don't have anything to prove. I mean, that's what peace is, when people don't have to prove anything to each other. Now that the Queen has died, maybe that can be something that we can think about. I think it's normal to believe that you're right. And that's what makes it so hard, because if everyone thinks that they're right and they have different values, then there are going to be lots of clashes. Maybe there are some arguments we don't need to have with people. And maybe sometimes we don't need to share our opinions, not because we're afraid, but because we feel like that's the best thing to do for everyone involved in the situation.
When King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia came on a state visit, she insisted on personally driving him around Balmoral in her Land Rover, well aware that women were not permitted to drive in Saudi.
We don't always have to have our opinion heard, you know, and I think the more codependent we can be, the more we do need that validation. So coming out of codependency and taking responsibility for ourselves can mean keeping our mouths shut. Narcissism is about putting yourself first to the detriment of other people, you know, and not caring about the connections you have with people, not caring about them in a way that is meaningful, just caring about what people can do for you. And so the Queen, although I don't want to make her into a saint, but she lived her life in the opposite way. I don't know what she would have said to the Prime Ministers behind closed doors. The royal website says, though the Queen remains politically neutral on all matters, she is able to advise and warn her ministers, including her Prime Minister, when necessary. Maybe she did get some stuff off her chest, you know, and say, is this really a sensible idea? You know, maybe she sometimes did do that. But even to sit in the same room week after week as some of these prime ministers, I'm sure a lot of people couldn't have done that without having a full-blown, massive argument with them.
What made those audiences so special was the understanding the Queen had of issues, which came from the work she put into her red boxes, combined with her years of experience. She knew many of the world leaders. In some cases, she had known their fathers. And she was a wise and adroit judge of people. The conversations at the audiences were special.
She was known to be close to Harold Wilson, who was her first Labour Prime Minister. She earned the respect of Winston Churchill. He complained she was only a child when she first came to the throne. According to his biographer, Lord Moran, he said, all the film people in the world, if they had scoured the globe, could not have found anyone so suited to the part. Churchill wanted the British Empire to remain as it was, and for Britain to fight for it where necessary. And the Queen didn't feel the same way about it. She believed in the Commonwealth, in a set of loosely connected nations where things were much more fluid and flexible. So for her, it wasn't ever about trying to control anyone. It was about living together. And I guess, again, that sounds quite idealistic, you know, living harmoniously together. But and now, of course, there are countries that no longer want her as their queen. I have to correct myself because I keep talking about her in the present tense. It's just so surreal she's no longer here. There are countries that are angry that she, you know, that they haven't had an apology for what happened during the days of the British Empire, what happened to their people, and how horrendous it was. Some of the Aboriginal community called for the Queen to apologise. Had she done that, it might have been incredibly therapeutic to those who needed to hear that in Australia and in several other countries, like the 6 Caribbean countries who wanted her removed as head of state. So maybe that's a downside of her staying out of politics. But the upside was the way she brought people together. So really, she's been about serving people. Even though she's lived in these big places, she certainly hasn't in most ways lived a life of luxury, because she's always been on her feet. You know, even as she's got older and older, she was just having to totter about and go to all these different events and meet all these people. It would have been quite an exhausting life, having to go off and be friendly and civil to people when you don't really feel like it, when you just want to relax, and always having all these cameras on you and so on. Her whole life really was about other people and living for other people. And she had a smile on her face. You know, she was optimistic. She would make little jokes.
I am deeply mindful of Your Majesty's long and tireless service to the Commonwealth and to its citizens. As head of the Commonwealth, you embody our family of nations and the values expressed in the Charter collectively endorsed 3 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister of Canada, for making me feel so old.
Even even when there were rumours that there was more of a frosty relationship between them, like with her and Margaret Thatcher, she's still gone on with her job. She was very restrained. And that takes humility. She had a lot of humility despite her position, and she put peace before her need to be heard. I wonder how much better we would get on, each one of us, if we were just a little bit more accepting of everyone's differences, and if the important thing was connecting and getting on with people rather than being right and being heard. And I guess this is starting to sound a bit like some kind of lecture, you know, in a Sunday school meeting. And but it just got me thinking, and I thought that maybe it would get you thinking too. Sometimes the way to make things better, the way to help people to be their best selves, is to just shut up, to just accept them as they are, you know, rather than trying to enforce our opinions, trying to make them change in some way. I hope that was helpful, or at least something to think about. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about Chris Rock and Will Smith and what it's like when you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you take your anger out on other people. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you then. Hey baby. Hey Billy, are you on a video? Yeah. You've been so good, haven't you? Been so good. Yes. So good. Should we go and get the chicken then? Is it ready? Should we get it out the oven? Shall we? Come on then, let's go. Let's go, baby. Let's go.